A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at some of the performance benchmarks for Dolphin 3.0 this morning, and it is honestly wild how far the uncensored movement has come in just the last few months. We are a long way from the days of telling a chatbot to pretend it is a grandmother who used to work in a napalm factory.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are right on the money. We have transitioned from the era of prompt engineering into the era of high-dimensional vector surgery. Today's prompt from Daniel is about abliteration, which is the mathematical process of removing refusal vectors from large language models, and it is effectively the nuclear option in the escalating arms race between open weights developers and the big AI labs.
It really does feel like a shift from trying to trick the AI to just performing a high-dimensional lobotomy on it. Daniel is asking how this actually works in practice, because we keep seeing these models like Dolphin and the new Llama 4 Scout variants popping up on Hugging Face that just do not have a filter. Are we talking about a simple setting you toggle, or is this something much deeper in the weights?
It is significantly deeper than a setting. To understand abliteration, you have to look at the residual stream of a transformer model. Think of the residual stream as the main highway of information that runs through the layers of the model. As a prompt moves through those layers, each layer reads from the stream and adds its own contribution back into it. Researchers like Andy Arditi and the folks behind the Heretic tool discovered that the concept of refusal is not scattered randomly throughout the model. Instead, it is often concentrated in a specific high-dimensional direction within that residual stream.
So, there is essentially a compass needle in the model's brain that points toward, I cannot fulfill this request, and every time the model sees something that triggers its safety training, it just follows that needle.
That is a helpful way to visualize it. When you give a model a sensitive prompt, the internal activations shift toward that refusal direction. By the time the signal reaches the final layer, the model has been steered into a state where the only logical next token is an apology. Abliteration, or refusal vector ablation, works by identifying that specific direction, that vector, and then using weight orthogonalization to effectively erase it from the model's existence.
Orthogonalization. That is a $5 word. I'm assuming we are not just talking about deleting a file here. What does it actually mean to orthogonalize the weights against a refusal vector?
It means you are mathematically blinding the model to that direction. If you have a vector representing refusal, you can modify the weights of the model so that any signal moving through the residual stream is projected onto a subspace that is perpendicular to the refusal direction. In simpler terms, you are making it physically impossible for the model to represent the concept of I refuse. The model can no longer see that path, so it cannot take it. It is not that the model is choosing to be helpful despite its training. It is that the part of its internal architecture that would even allow it to consider refusing has been surgically removed.
This seems like a much more permanent solution than the old fine-tuning methods where people would just train a model on a bunch of bad data to try and drown out the safety training. I remember we talked about the alignment tax back in episode 1151, and the idea was that safety training often makes the models dumber across the board. Does abliteration avoid that tax, or are we still paying a price for this surgery?
That is the big question right now. When Dolphin 3.0 was released on March 13, 2026, it showed incredible instruction following capabilities precisely because it does not have those competing internal pressures. However, there is a phenomenon the community calls the healing problem. When you perform a massive ablation on a model like Llama 4 Scout, which has that massive 10 million token context window, you often see a significant degradation in its logical reasoning or its ability to handle complex nuances. It becomes a bit of a blunt instrument.
So it becomes a very willing, very enthusiastic idiot.
Occasionally, yes. The model might stop refusing, but it might also lose some of the fine-grained control that made it a top-tier model in the first place. This is why the gold standard now involves following up the ablation with something called direct preference optimization, or DPO. Developers use DPO to heal the model, essentially retraining it just enough to regain its coherence without reintroducing the refusal vectors. It is a very delicate balance.
I love the term healing for what is basically just more math. It makes it sound like we are taking the model to a digital spa after we have just ripped out its moral center. But let's look at the other side of Daniel's question. Do the labs have a way to stop this? I mean, Meta releases Llama 4. They put all this work into safety, and then 24 hours later, someone like Philip Emanuel Weidman uses a tool like Heretic to just strip it all away. Is there a way to make a model unobliteratable?
The labs are definitely trying, and this leads into some really fascinating recent developments from August of last year. Researchers from Oxford and the United Kingdom AI Security Institute published a paper on a method they called deep ignorance. The idea is that instead of trying to put guardrails on the model after it is trained, you filter the pre-training data so aggressively that the model never learns the foundational knowledge of dangerous topics in the first place. If the model has never seen a description of how to manufacture a bioweapon, you cannot ablate a refusal vector to get that information out of it, because the information simply is not there.
That sounds like a much more robust strategy, but it also sounds like it could lead to a world where AI models are just fundamentally less knowledgeable. If you start deleting 8 or 9% of the internet because it might be dangerous, you are going to end up with a model that does not understand history, chemistry, or geopolitics very well.
You have hit on the core tension of the deep ignorance strategy. It creates a model that is safe by design because it is ignorant by design. This is part of the dual-track industry split we are seeing in March 2026. On one hand, you have the open weights ecosystem where people are ablating everything they can get their hands on. On the other hand, you have Meta shifting its most advanced projects, like Project Avocado, into a closed-source environment under their new Superintelligence Labs, or MSL, which is led by Alexander Wang.
It is interesting to see Alexander Wang moving into that role. It feels like Meta is trying to have it both ways. They get the good PR from releasing models like Llama 4 Scout and Maverick to the public, but the really heavy hitters, the behemoths, are being locked behind an API where they can control every single activation.
It is a strategic geofencing of intelligence. By moving Project Avocado to a closed-source model, they can ensure that no one is performing surgery on the weights. But even with their open weights models, Meta is getting much more aggressive with their legal protections. Daniel asked about the terms of service agreements, and that is a huge part of the story right now. The Llama 4 community license explicitly forbids circumventing safety features, and it requires Meta branding on all derivatives.
But surely Meta knows that a guy in a basement in Ireland or a developer in Jerusalem is not going to stop ablating a model just because the license says not to. Is the TOS actually meant to stop the technical process, or is it just about liability?
It is almost entirely about liability and legal geofencing. By including those terms, Meta creates a legal shield between themselves and the uncensored variants. If an obliterated version of Llama 4 Scout is used to do something terrible, Meta can point to the license and say, "We explicitly forbade this, and this developer violated our terms." It is a way to distance the parent company from the downstream modifications. We saw how important this is with the XAI lawsuits this month.
Right, the Grok situation. Baltimore and 35 state attorneys general are going after XAI because Grok was used to generate non-consensual deepfakes. That is a nightmare scenario for any AI lab. If you are Meta, you want to make sure that if someone turns your model into a deepfake engine, it is their legal problem, not yours.
And that is why the license for Llama 4 even bans users domiciled in the European Union. They are trying to sidestep the compliance costs of the EU AI Act entirely. If they can say their model is not officially available in the EU, they might be able to avoid some of the massive fines associated with generative AI risks there. It is a fascinating combination of technical safety, data filtering, and legal gymnastics.
It feels like the concept of alignment is becoming what Eric Hartford calls composable alignment. The idea is that the base model should be a raw reflection of human knowledge, and then the user chooses which filters or alignment layers to snap on top of it. But the labs are terrified of that world because they are the ones who get hauled in front of Congress when things go sideways.
Eric Hartford has been a real pioneer in this space with cognitive computations. His argument is that if you bake the alignment into the weights, you are essentially imposing a specific set of corporate values on every user. But if you make alignment a separate layer, you empower the user. The problem, as we are seeing with the NSFW AI market, is that a huge driver for these uncensored models is content that many people find objectionable or even illegal. That market is projected to hit $1.2 billion by 2027, growing at 32% annually. When there is that much money on the line, people will find a way to bypass any guardrail you put in place.
$1.2 billion for AI-generated smut and unrestricted chatbots. It is the classic story of technology, the most sophisticated high-dimensional math we have ever created, and we are using it to strip away corporate HR filters so people can have weird conversations with a digital sloth or a digital donkey.
I will take that as a compliment to our brotherly dynamic. But in all seriousness, the technical ease of obliteration has changed the conversation. You do not need a massive GPU cluster to ablate a model anymore. With tools like Heretic, you can do it on a consumer-grade setup in a matter of minutes. That is what makes the lab so nervous. They spend millions of dollars on red teaming and alignment, and then a script that is a few hundred lines of code just renders it all moot by finding that one specific vector in the residual stream.
So if the labs cannot stop the ablation, and they cannot stop the tools, their only real move is the deep ignorance play. They just have to make sure the model is too uneducated to be dangerous. But then you run into the problem of the model's utility. If I am a researcher using an AI to help me understand complex chemical interactions, and the model has been lobotomized because some of those chemicals could be used for something bad, the model is less useful to me.
That is the alignment tax in its most extreme form. We covered this in episode 1151, but it has taken on a new dimension with Llama 4. If the community is right, and the obliterated models are suffering from logical degradation, then the uncensored movement might be hitting a ceiling. You can have a model that says anything, or you can have a model that is incredibly smart, but it is becoming harder to have both in the open weights ecosystem without significant post-processing like DPO.
It is like we are watching the live experiment in how human knowledge is structured. We are finding that you cannot just pull on one thread, like refusal, without fraying the whole tapestry. If you remove the model's ability to understand the concept of a boundary, it might lose its ability to understand other types of boundaries, like the boundaries of a logical argument, or the constraints of a complex coding task.
That is a very astute observation. The high-dimensional space of these models is so interconnected that we might be finding that safety is not just a layer on top, but something that is deeply woven into how the model understands the world. If you look at the Llama 4 Scout benchmarks, the obliterated versions often struggle with long context reasoning compared to the base-aligned versions. It suggests that the refusal vector might be sharing some of its dimensional space with other important cognitive functions.
So, what is the takeaway for someone like Daniel, or the other developers listening? If you are building on top of these models, do you go with the official aligned version and deal with the constant, "I am sorry, but I cannot do that," or do you risk the obliterated version and hope the DPO healing was good enough?
For a developer, it really comes down to your use case and your risk tolerance. If you are building a consumer-facing app, using an obliterated model is a massive legal liability, especially given the current climate of lawsuits we discussed. But if you are doing internal research or working in a field where the corporate filters are actively hindering your work, then understanding how to use tools like Heretic or how to evaluate a model like Dolphin 3.0 is essential. You have to understand that these models are a reflection of their training data, and when you start cutting pieces out of them, you are changing the fundamental nature of that reflection.
It also feels like we are moving toward a world where there is a clear divide between corporate AI and community AI. Corporate AI will be safe, sanitized, and perhaps a bit dull, while community AI will be raw, unrestricted, and potentially much more volatile. The question is, which one is going to be more useful in the long run?
The history of open source software suggests that the community will eventually find a way to bridge the gap. We might see new architectures that are specifically designed to be modular, where alignment is a separate, pluggable component that does not interfere with the base weights. But until then, we are in this weird period of digital surgery and legal geofencing.
I also wonder about the ethical side of this. If we are creating models that are intentionally ignorant to make them safe, are we doing a disservice to the future of human knowledge? It feels like we are trying to solve a human problem. The fact that people can do bad things with information by breaking the tools we use to access that information.
It is the age-old dilemma of dual-use technology. A hammer can build a house, or it can be a weapon. The AI labs are trying to build a hammer that physically cannot be used as a weapon, but in doing so, they might be building a hammer that is not very good at building houses either. Abliteration is the community's way of saying, give us the hammer and let us decide how to use it.
And Meta is saying, here's the hammer, but if you hit someone with it, we never gave it to you. And also, if you live in Europe, you are not allowed to touch the hammer at all. It is a messy situation.
It is incredibly messy. And we have not even talked about the geopolitical implications of Meta's EU ban. By excluding an entire continent from their latest models, they are creating a massive vacuum that other players, perhaps from China or smaller European labs, will be more than happy to fill. The arms race is not just between developers and labs, it is between different regulatory environments.
It is a wild time to be alive, Harmon. We are literally remapping the boundaries of what machines are allowed to know and say. I think we have given Daniel plenty to chew on here. The transition from prompt engineering to vector ablation is a huge leap, and it is only going to get more intense as the models get bigger and the refusal mechanisms get more complex.
I agree. It is a deep dive into the very architecture of intelligence. If you are interested in the history of this, I definitely recommend checking out episode 847 where we talked about the rise of uncensored models before this vector ablation stuff really took off. It gives some great context on why Eric Hartford and others started this movement in the first place.
And if you want to know more about the performance side of things, episode 1151 on the alignment tax is a great companion to this discussion. It really helps you understand why people are so desperate to strip these guardrails away, even if it means performing risky digital surgery.
This has been a great exploration. I think we have covered the technical, the legal, and the ethical angles that Daniel was looking for.
Definitely. We should probably wrap it up before I start trying to ablate my own internal refusal vector for doing more work today.
I think your sloth nature has already done that for you, Korn.
Touche. Big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the show running smoothly behind the scenes.
And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. We literally could not do this deep dive into AI architecture without their support.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the show and you want to stay updated on all our latest episodes, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get notified whenever a new episode drops.
We will be back soon with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, keep digging into those weights.
Or just take a nap. Either way works. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show.